Okay, thank you.
So, how are you feeling? Everything good?
Yeah, it's good, and it's great to be here. And yeah, like I just like to say, thanks to everyone who's come to StripeCon Europe. It's been a long journey to get here that Julian shared with us, and I just think it's really exciting to see it all come together. So today I'm kicking things off with a talk. When is a CMS not a CMS? This is StripeCon. This is the 7th StripeCon. I can't believe we've made it this far. I can't believe when I first went to Lynn's, I didn't think it would have, would be up to our 7th by this stage. So I haven't been to all of them. I've been to 5, but I did give some of our team another go to visit Europe in 2017 and 2018. It did also coincide with having a very small child, so it was also helpful to stay home. This time I'm here. That's a view from outside the room. I'm in a little house a little bit north of Wellington where I live. So quite a different environment from the previous StripeCons. So in the past, I've done sort of a retrospective about the past and future of the Silverstripe CMS project. Today I'm going to speak something about a little bit more specific. ModelAdmin's our old friend. So that's really why, to answer the question on my title, when is a CMS not a CMS? When it's Silverstripe CMS. Today is really about how much more than just content management Silverstripe can do, and how that can be quite useful for the people you build things for you, and for the future of the project. So today I'm going to do a bit of a case study in this risk management app. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the alternatives for why ModelAdmin is a good choice, and why ModelAdmin is a good choice. I'm going to talk a bit about what that teaches us about the CMS's value, and I will close in talking a little bit about what might be next for the Silverstripe CMS project. So probably the first thing you might be wondering is, why on earth did I build a risk management app? And there's one answer to that: ISO 27001. So this is a security standard that we are getting ourselves certified against, because that's what all our customers value. Part of that risk management is really, really important. You need some kind of thing to store them in, even if it's just a very simple spreadsheet. There are more dedicated off-the-shelf tools available, but they are quite expensive. So I thought, why not build my own? Why would we do that? The first up is flexibility. Any custom piece of software, you can tailor it to your needs a lot more than something off the shelf would get. And we were looking, and basically for the cost that an off-the-shelf tool that's specialist for it, you could get quite a lot of developer hours towards a ModelAdmin based solution. One of the things that it's a pattern that I've sort of come across in our organization, and I think other moderately sized organizations where you get 50, 100, 150 people, is that it's a struggle to make do with off-the-shelf tools, and heavy customization implementation is typical. So you're never just picking up a tool and using it. There's always a lot of work involved in actually making something your own. So my hypothesis, which I was testing with this project really, and which I'm sharing with you today, was that ModelAdmin can give you a customized app for an investment that's similar to purchasing and implementing, one of the more enterprise SaaS options. Plus, it means I get to write code. It's not really my job anymore, so it's nice to have something that is related to the business that does give me that opportunity. So, what are the alternatives? I didn't go into this completely blind. I did consider, some of the alternative options for this kind of problem. First up, there's good old-fashioned spreadsheets. They're cheap, they're easy, they're not very flexible, but the relationships between data, especially many relationships, are really difficult and quite weak. So you sort of hit the limit of what a spreadsheet can do quite quickly, but that is often where where people start in their journey for putting together a system to track some information is, well, I'll start with a spreadsheet and see how far that gets me. Another option is what I call enterprise SaaS. So this is tools like Salesforce. There's one called Fresh Service that we've been using, and there are others in this space. Software as a service that comes from someone like Oracle will also fall into this space. So they're very flexible. Salesforce is an incredibly flexible tool, but it's also very expensive. You wind up spending $100 or more per user per month. And if you roll this out across the organization, that can get really, really expensive. One of the things that happens is that the flexibility winds up getting reduced because there's always this question of, do we actually want to give everyone user accounts on this? Because our costs will go up. So you wind up limiting the number of users that can use an application, which limits it. And the other thing is that these systems are really, really flexible because implementing solutions in them is a lot more like a software project. You're building a data model, you're setting up all the views for that data model, you're putting constraints and triggers and all of these kind of things. You can build whatever you want, but it gets closer and closer to essentially coding. Another tool in this space, and this is, I guess, a newer generation, is the tools like Airtable. So these are really, really interesting, and they do, I think, cut a bit of a better line of providing a simpler set of tools while also having the flexibility that you lack in a spreadsheet. So they deal with relationships and many relationships quite well. But the fact is, this is still a configuration tool rather than a software tool, and so you do hit limits that you don't hit in ModelAdmin. And later on, I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that I believe would have been quite difficult with a tool like this. And then the final thing in this kind of space is why not build a piece of software and then use something like ReactAdmin to connect to it? Again, it's another really interesting tool. It's quite different from something like Airtable. It's flexible because it doesn't try to solve all the problems. It really just looks at the user interface layer and assembling user interfaces. So it's more part of the solution than the whole thing. You still need to build your own backend. But I think this is a technology that is interesting and is worth keeping a look at. So, how does ModelAdmin stack up? One of the things about ModelAdmin is that it provides both the data model and the administrative interface. So compared to something like ReactAdmin or building a piece of software on your own or just taking an MVC framework and doing whatever, the Silverstripe and ModelAdmin does come with more out of the box than some of those other tools. Obviously, tools like Salesforce, like Airtable, like spreadsheets, these also come with a lot out of the box too. But they fall short in other ways. The other strength of a ModelAdmin solution is that data modeling is very, very flexible. Not only do you have the ability to add all of the relationship types that you might expect to be available as standard, you can have your has-ones, your has-manys, your many-manys, and so forth. There's also the ability with relatively small pieces of code to create customized relationships that perhaps take other data in the system, mash it together, and present it as a virtual relationship or a virtual list of related data. The other thing that ModelAdmin provides as a platform is a variety of UI approaches, thanks to all the grid field plugins and all the form fields that are out there. Silverstripe ecosystem has got lots of plugins for grid field, lots of other form fields, and so you can assemble you can assemble different solutions based on these, relatively quickly, and you can really think about, okay, what's the best way of interacting with the data in my application without getting hung up on the details of having to build that from scratch. Another thing that I think is worth noting is that snapshotted versioning provides a great companion for apps requiring audit trails. So for a lot of these applications, yes, there's a piece of data that you kind of need to work with, but it's also really important to know, has it changed in the past? And if so, who changed it and when? And maybe allow rollback and things like that. So this versioning in Silverstripe, which was designed for the content management system, but can be used on anything, is really, really helpful. You can kind of just drop it in and get a lot of that work for free. So the final benefit, I think, compared to a lot of those other tools, is that it's open source. So why is open source a benefit? Obviously, I think open source is great, but why? It's not primarily about being free, because building and hosting an application costs money. If you're just like, oh, open source is better because it's free, you know, the real question will be, well, what is the total cost of ownership, and how does that stack up with these options? But I think what's quite striking in my experience working with sophisticated SaaS apps and open source solutions is that open source stops you from tripping over license restrictions. So what you get with open source is you know there's a cost of building the solution, and that will be the cost. And if you want more people to use it, that's okay. You don't inadvertently hit the limit of, oh, well, yeah, you need a new license to do that, or you need to add more users, so it's going to cost more. And, you know, rightly or wrongly, a lot of businesses in that as a service space have, surprising restrictions that fall in and can derail projects or can make projects a lot more expensive. So strategically, I think open source gives more clarity over what you're going to wind up spending. And I think that can be really, really valuable. So that's a little bit of context about why I embarked on building an application with ModelAdmin, some of the alternatives in this space, and why I think even in 2020, 15 years after we started building Silverstripe, ModelAdmin is still a really compelling solution for these kind of projects. So how did it go? So I think this might be a good segue to switch to show you a little bit of the application. So this is the application here. It starts with an massively overcooked dashboard with lots of stuff on there, but the core of it really is this notion of risks. So I have some risks in my system. I've just got a couple in a test data here, because I wouldn't really be a good information security certification if I exposed a bunch of sensitive company data in a public presentation. We have, risks. They've got an impact and a likelihood, which gives them a rating, and that rating gives them sort of a color, a t-shirt size. And if I click on one of these, so this is the risk that staff fall prey to social engineering. So, staff may inadvertently grant access to an attacker through social engineering. It would give them, if it was an administrative staff, it might give them access to our critical systems, a regular user account, it might be compromised. And then for any one of those risks, I can have one or more controls. So the security awareness training is something we could do to say, well, let's give everyone some basic training to make sure that they know not to fall victim to the tricks of social engineering attacks. And maybe that adjusts the likelihood, so it takes it from unlikely to possible to almost never. And if we then go back, we can see that we've got a base rating based on the idea that we don't do that training, treated rating based in the idea that we do. And so then we can say, okay, well, how's our risk profile looking? Have we taken care of this? And say, yep, that's a good set of controls. We can say that that's treated. Other sort of aspects to the system. So this risk, or if I go to one of the controls, if I open up this control, we could say, the assets are scoped. So I could scope this to specific assets in our system, or I could just say scope it to a category, just like all IT systems. I could potentially limit it to only ones with a certain sensitivity of information or a certain impact. And I can do that with each one of my controls. In the real system, there's more than the 2 or 3 I've got. And then that lets us basically take all those controls and say, well, let's verify that those controls are actually applied to the various assets that we've got. So here, I might review the risk management app itself, which is an asset controlled by this. And so I might say, these tests pass or fail. And for the passes, it'll give me a validation. And for the failures, I might have to say devices aren't labeled properly. Gives me a bit of a record to do some work in the future. In addition to that, risks and controls. They've got the ability, if I open up a control, they've got the ability to have a bit of a discussion. Here, default admin has said, can we talk about this? I'm not sure it's realistic. And I might say, sounds good, let's book a meeting. And then I can comment. And my comment is left there. So there's lots of features in this, and I'm not going to go through them all, but that gives a little bit of a flavor of the the kind of thing that we've put together for solving the risk management problems that we've had. So let's click proceed. So what went well? So grid field and the other fields were really, really beneficial in pulling together the kinds of user interaction that we needed. To recap on some of the things that we had there. Here we've had the ability to do custom coloring, custom fields, and the ability to sort by any of these. So to make a list of the most important information was really, really useful here. And this view and the way in which we laid it out, and although it's not entirely clear, there's a combination of sort of HTML snippets as well as just standard text fields. This was very easy to kind of iteratively tweak with both sort of off-the-shelf selections of fields, but also custom code as we went along rolling out the app. So that was quite handy. If we look at something like this, the old grid field editable columns meant that we could have some views where we had more like open up each record and have a separate view to edit it. But in this case, we could also have a few fields that we could edit inline. And again, the number of fields that we edit inline, some of the related triggers that we had coming off of that was very straightforward to sort of take different controls, assemble them in different ways in different screens, and get the kind of interactions that we wanted. And here, we brought in tag fields, we brought in option sets, we brought in some display logic to have the categories field only show when you've selected one radio button and different fields show with the other radio buttons. Again, this was areas where we were kind of sketching out the data model in parallel with building the user interface to work on that data model. So we went through a lot of iterations. And again, it was quite straightforward to start with one set of fields in there, change it out, change it out, change it out as the app kind of grew. So the other area was that I think was really, really valuable here is our ORM. Basic relations are supported easily, and customized relationships can be added with only a small piece of code. And yes, other ORMs would probably do this as well, but the fact that we had a real ORM connected to all the other pieces in this stack is very, very valuable. Compared to using Airtable, using Salesforce, using a spreadsheet, using some of those other options, a real ORM is very valuable. And that's sort of what you often get with Silverstripe, is any one of the pieces might be equally served by other projects out there, but it's the combination of them all in one package that makes things helpful. So this was, a slice of the data model where we have, we've got, the risks and the controls, and there's a sort of a mini relationship between risks and controls through what we call a risk reduction, which is basically a way that a particular control reduces the impact or likelihood of a particular risk. And then all of those likelihoods and impacts, each combination of likelihood and impact would map to a given risk rating, which gives us a severity, critical, high, medium, low, and a score, which is more just a number from 1 to 25. And from those, we basically have a base rating, which is based on the risk and likelihood and impact straight on the risk. And then we have a treated rating where we say, well, take all of the risk reductions of all the controls on that risk and just how low have you managed to get the risk. So that kind of information, you're never going to drag and drop your way to that kind of sophisticated interaction with how the treated rating is calculated and how it relates to some of the other information. That's an area where code really is what you need. And so, I can't guarantee that it would be impossible to do it with the non-coding based solutions, but I can say it's pretty unlikely, and it would be very impressive if they could. But, never say never. What I did find, and I guess this is a tip if you're building these applications, is that denormalizing worked better than it should. So denormalizing data is generally thought of as a bad thing. It creates duplication. It has the potential for those duplicates to be inconsistent. But ultimately denormalization is also just a form of caching. So one of the quirks of Silverstripe with things like grid field sorting, with things like grid field filtering, denormalizing the data means you can just drop those denormalized columns in and sort, filter to your heart's content. You don't hit weird limits where the ORM won't let you sort. So if we have a look at this screen, I can't sort by the number of controls because it's not denormalized. And so what I found was the easiest way, rather than hacking the ORM internals for this one project, was just denormalizing the fields I wanted to be sortable. This is how I wound up approaching it. So a lot of the denormalized data, the kind of simple stuff, could be updated via on before write, on after write triggers. But when it got really complicated, we actually just put in an hourly cron job. And this data, it's important that it is eventually consistent. An hourly cron job was good enough, and it worked pretty well. It's not the kind of solution that you'd proudly proclaim from the mountaintops, but I guess I'm proudly proclaiming it from a mountaintop here. But it works. So I would say that worked okay. Here's an example of how we used the ORM internals to calculate the treated risk rating as a denormalized piece of information. So if you've used Silverstripe before, hopefully most of that is pretty clear. And the nice thing is that there's not too much boilerplate there. It is really just a piece of logic using ORM's API to take a new answer out of the old ones based on the business requirements. So yeah, it's just a place where Silverstripe's really, really helpful. So those are two of the things where I thought, at a high level, some of the strengths. Obviously, there are gaps. Silverstripe's not perfect for this, especially if you look at like full-featured enterprise workflow solutions, like something like a Salesforce. And so, some of those gaps are collaboration, access control, reporting, and the ability for administrators rather than developers to customize things. So first up, collaboration. There's a few areas where collaboration would be nice. One is internal comments. So out of the box, before I started this project, Silverstripe didn't really have a lot of support for any kind of internal comments for users of the CMS to talk to each other. Another one would be just sort of ways in which you can assign people tasks. You can create an owner field on an object. You can create a report which lets you see objects owned by a person. But you've kind of got to do that for each type. And it's difficult to kind of provide a list of all the things that I own of all the different types. It's difficult to create tasks other than owning one of those objects. So you wind up sometimes creating quite complicated data models just to have different objects for all the kind of things that someone might want to do. Other systems, sometimes have more of a, we've just got a task that's been rolled out of a system. And so, here's a risk and I add a task to a risk like, oh, can you review it? Or just a sundry task like, oh, can you check in with such and such? I think we need to book a meeting about this. And so you can just write that as a free-form task. Notifications is also a weakness, like a unified kind of notification system for kind of when someone's made a comment, when something's been assigned, when things have gone through different statuses, if you've had a task assigned or a task you created has been completed. All of these are things that you might conceivably want to receive notifications for. You might each have preferences about whether the notifications come on email or Slack or some other system. You might want to make it pluggable so you can plug other notification channels in there. And kind of workflow covers this concept, and we do have some workflow modules out there, the advanced workflow modules being, a long-standing one. But it is quite difficult to take those things and drop them in. Like, it winds up feeling a bit like a round peg in a square hole. I think that, the workflow modules that exist were mainly around content publication workflow. And although there's some, pieces of them which could be adapted to other situations, it doesn't feel like a complete solution to this that you get in other systems. So this is an area where frankly, I think Silverstripe could do better in these areas. So one of the modules that rolled out of this was this little one called Silverstripe Model Comments, and that basically provided that comments tab that I showed in the wee demo. It's very MVP right now. It needs a better UX, because in order to actually post a comment, you've got to fill out the box and then save the whole record. And because it's an editable columns, good field editable columns, it'll save it. Really, it'll be nice to be able to comment without, a comment button without saving the whole record. And it would also be nice, when you make changes, to sort of have it just prompt, oh, would you like to comment about the change you made? Because that's often how these things are used. Explain why you've made the change you've made. Give some, justification for it. It's essentially a git commit message, but for a database application. And then the other side, which could be nicer, is tying together the record change tracking with the comments. So you can have a unified view of, this is what changes have been made and this is why. Maybe hoisting up the prominence of changes to the status field, rather than just being, oh yeah, I changed a field. Oh, it happens to be the status. It's like, no, show me status changes as more prominently, because that's often the primary change that people care about, compared to, say, changing a title or editing a description. And this was, what that app looked like. It gives you a comments tab on anything that you drop in the model comments extension to. It uses a polymorphic has-one. To be able to, relate each comment to any one of a number of data objects. And again, polymorphic has one. Silverstripe just provides it. This module, and I guess what was nice, this module took like a few hours to build. All of the bones were there for us. There was very little hard. I do admittedly only use the things that were kind of easy in Silverstripe, which is why the UX is a bit weak. But as a way of kind of getting things started with much more limited effort than building it from scratch in another system might take, it's quite handy. So I'm keen to see ModelAdmin model comments grow and to become more of a discussion system. Another area where Silverstripe is not great is access control. So users work and groups work really, really well. We use the existing system to basically build up a big hierarchy of all our users in our organization by their teams. We created roles that then assigned to the teams. So we had a little bit of decoupling about who's, which team someone's in and like what rights they have in the system. But the actual permission system is quite weak. You've got these permission codes. They're just like on or off for the entire system. There's no kind of access control list, or the record level permissions require that you basically go outside that and create completely new fields with can view methods and the like. So in, say, content editing, you wind up with the site tree, viewer groups and editor groups, which aren't manageable in the same place as the rest of the permissions. And it's all just a bit confusing and could be a lot better. So again, I've made this thing called Silverstripe Micro ACL. This is even more of an experiment than the model comments one, but this is, I think, an interesting area, because without rebuilding the permission system from scratch, which has historically been the kind of the thinking about this, we're able to use permission codes to provide record level permissions with some configurability. And the way that I did this, the kind of essential technique, was you can put numbers into the permission codes and you can have dynamically generated permission codes. So I've just done a thing where basically the permission codes have a record ID, and then the available permissions, you can select which records have special rights and which ones, get the standard version. So the idea is you can kind of go through and you can say, okay, well, these records have elevated or customized privileges. Those records will get extra checkboxes in the permission view, and and everything else will just use the standard permission code, which means all of the metadata about who has access to what is contained in the permission code table, and you can assign that all through the roles or the groups at your leisure. It's an experiment. It probably won't scale to 100,000 records, 50,000 of which have customized permissions. It's not clear at this stage whether that's solely down to limitations of the user interface, or whether there are more fundamental things. But it doesn't provide the best database for doing batch permissions, because everything's those extra bits of data are embedded in a string. But it could still with string fragment based search queries still potentially provide batch checking of permissions, which is often a problem. So I think it's an interesting experiment. The key thing that I really wanted to highlight was that this works in Silverstripe 4. We didn't have to make breaking changes for this. So you're able to try out improving the access permissions without saying, oh, well, maybe we can break everything on that in Silverstripe 5 and fix it then, which is kind of nice. It frees you from having to make awkward trade-offs as a developer, but it also means you're left waiting, and people have to go through big upgrades in order to do that. So these limitations, gives me this idea that, some sort of workflow for business apps would probably be a useful addition, kind of bringing in the model comments, bringing in the notion of status fields, and fleshing them out a bit. So, the idea of basically having a finite state machine of statuses. This is the example what we have in our risks. Goes from new to assessed to treated to closed. After a scheduled period, things can go from either assessed or treated up to needs review. And this, you could envision letting people create the statuses as an administrator, saying, what the transitions are allowed between each status, saying whether or not comments are mandatory at any one of those steps, maybe rights. So not everyone can do every transition, but some of those transitions are privileged. So we have a notion of approval in some of the other areas of the system where only a selection of users can approve things. So that, and then specific validation rules for statuses is another thing, which I don't know, we haven't thought about how that would apply to this application, but in other business apps, I've seen areas where it's like, oh, well, to go from a new sales lead to a qualified sales lead, there's a bunch of fields about making sure we've gone through the qualification process that you need to fill those out before making the status change. So you might imagine different validation rule sets on the developer side that only apply at certain statuses. And the final one, and this is something that we have, is dev managed automatic status changes. So maybe a scheduled task that moves things from one status to another based on a date. So this is, again, I think, an interesting area that would be worth exploring when improving Silverstripe's use for business apps. So we've made some progress on the rights and the comments area. Some of these other areas, haven't really looked at all, but I think this will be a cool area to explore. Another area where there is a gap is reporting. So you can build reports, you can add some custom filters, but they're all very much created by the developer. A lot of people expect to be able to, without asking the developer, pull together a report out of the system by selecting what fields they want, selecting filters, some grouping rules, and doing it that way. So this is, again, I think, an area where Silverstripe could stand to be better, and I don't have an MVP module this time. And the final one, and this is probably a little bit more controversial, is how do you let administrators have more control? And I say controversial because it sort of breaks Silverstripe's design philosophy of coding a lot of these things in development and avoiding duck programming. But it does come up frequently. We see it a lot in government RFPs because that's what we deal with, where governments say we need a piece of software that does this, and the administrator's ability to customize these things often comes up. And it comes up in the context that often, getting development changes will be a different person's budget. It'll have different risks. There'll be a lot of sign-off. It might take them weeks or months to actually get that change made. And so even though in a vacuum, you might say, oh, well, a dev can make a change just as easily as you know, an administrator. In practice, the way these organizations are set up, that can be very, very difficult. And you can't, you know, redesign the organization to meet a technical constraint. And so, you know, like maybe these could be introduced in more of a limited way. I don't know. Like this is I think, an area that's is worthy of more consideration. So those are basically some of the gaps that that I identified, and I think that the other thing I wanted to touch on was just a bit of a surprise. So this app, I went in, it got reinvented 3 or 4 times. I kind of misunderstood the scope of the application when I started it. As I added more data to the system, the scope of the application and the best way to manage that data changed. I had sort of new insights about, oh, this would be better ways of categorizing. Now, as a single person acting as product owner, developer, and user, that worked quite well. But that was a special case. You know, that was very unique to this situation. And most applications like this, you're not going to get that situation. But it did kind of leave me thinking, how do you allow for applications where the development of the data model, the scope, the business rules is itself exploratory and being driven in parallel with the loading in of the data? How do you avoid having to you know, lock people into a particular data model before they move on? And this is really difficult with software, because typically software is set up with certain assumptions, and breaking, and you know, you try your best to make the assumptions right, or limit the extent to which those assumptions can't be changed. But some of them, you know, an author's like, oh, you know, can I want to be able to select one country for each page, and they're like, that's great. And then they come back and say, oh, can I select more than one? You're like, well, I made it as a has one relationship. Now I need to change it to a many. That involves creation of tables. All the data that you've loaded in needs to be moved. This is really annoying for me. And you know, the person's like, it doesn't sound that hard. Just change the like single drop-down selector to a multi-selector. Why are you making it so difficult? But this is the nature of our craft. So the lesson for me was build more model admins. This is a part of Silverstripe that I really think, you know, I want to celebrate more. I want to push more as, you know, part of the reason for why Silverstripe is a great platform. I'm sure that lots of people out there are like, duh, Sam, I know. We've been using it for years. But really, it's just like, this is almost more of a unique selling point for Silverstripe than the actual content management functionality. The other side of this, I think, is that when you look at what's exciting about Silverstripe CMS, it's not what you see in an out-of-the-box demo. Like, Silverstripe is a lean, modular, extensible platform, which means unless you set it up carefully, a demo is often a little underwhelming. It's like, oh, it seems a bit limited if you just install the base installer. But I think where Silverstripe really shines is after just a few hours of development targeted at, you know, whatever customers use case, you can really go quite far in making something that looks like it's designed just for them. And so that, I think, is really, you know, where Silverstripe shines, is not show me what it gives out of the box, but give me a few hours and I'll show you just how you know, just how far we can go. The first version of the risk management app, I was talking to our InfoSec people, and it was just you know, I said, oh, I think we can do this, and you know, had a late night coding, and kind of came in the next day saying, see, and they're like, what? This looks like custom software. They were relatively new to Silverstripe, so they were less familiar with the sort of stuff we build, but for them, they were sort of flabbergasted that it was like, okay, you know, overnight, you can kind of like build a whole app that's just for this. Model admins let you solve more complicated business challenges, and I think this means you can do work that's more valuable for your customers, and you're less likely to get the, well, can't I just have WordPress? Like, people typically these days, they think content management systems is a product category where I should be like making the decision about what I use, because I know I'm going to be like stuck with that, and it's going to affect my ability to you know, edit my site or not. So people come in and they're like, I'm going to weigh in on which CMS I should use. And, you know, let's be honest, WordPress is more well known than Silverstripe CMS, and so people out there, they'll come in saying, "Hey, can I have WordPress?" And all of the arguments about technical sophistication or maintainability in the long run, they sort of say, yeah, but other people use WordPress, so they can't be wrong. So just give me WordPress. Whereas I think Silverstripe CMS, it's been a CMS, it's in its name, but at its core, it is a rapid development tool. And in 2005, content management was an innovative, exciting area. Whereas in 2020, it is more of a commodity. And if you're looking for niches to really kind of capture Silverstripe CMS's power, business applications built on ModelAdmin, I think are an area ripe for more exploration. So the great thing about StripeCon is the variety of ways in which people use Silverstripe CMS. So it's not really about trying to make it one thing. And I think, the future of Silverstripe CMS is about supporting all of these ideas and letting really sort of embracing the different directions in which people can take it. So in closing, I'll be remiss if I didn't sort of talk a little bit about, what about, we had Silverstripe 4 a few years ago. What about Silverstripe CMS 5? And this is where I want to talk about, big bang releases are kind of a problem. Upgrading from 3 to 4 is a lot of work. We've had a lot of projects take a lot of time, moving from Silverstripe 3 to Silverstripe 4. And that's still, in people's mind, really recent work. Silverstripe CMS 3 is not even end of life yet. It's got one more year until it's finally closed the curtain on it. And CMS 4, people are going to want to use that for a while yet. So, I would expect people are wanting to have at least 3 more years in there. And I'm not keen to force upgrades for the sake of maintaining security and being on a supported version on people again, more or less ever. I just don't think it's the best way to run a software project is to force that decision on you if you've got any alternative. So what about CMS 5? What does this mean for CMS 5? And when people ask this, I like to think that really what they're asking is not about CMS 5, but they're asking, how do we keep innovating? And in that line, I don't think CMS 5 is about CMS 5 at all, because innovation abhors a monolith. When you try to be innovative with a big monolith that moves forward together all at once, you can't improve everything to the extent that you'd like. You always have all of these ideas. You get some of them all the way, you get some of them halfway, and you leave some of them on the cutting room floor. And related to that, not everyone benefits from the changes you make. So you make a bunch of changes, and for any one change, maybe more than half people are like, well, that change doesn't really matter to me. It means that the scope of an upgrade is huge, so that people are like, well, I've got to change and make deal with these breaking changes in all of these areas. And so it becomes quite a big, scary project. And related to that, it also means that you can't make those API changes again and again and again and again. So if you make an API change, it needs to be more or less set in concrete, but it needs to be set in concrete before the stable release comes out. People aren't going to upgrade to the alpha if it's just like, well, I'll just wait till everything's stable because I'm mainly sort of following the train rather than really needing that feature now. And so these changes need to be set in concrete before you can even release them. So that is a bunch of problems why I think if we're trying to be innovative, trying to move a monolith forward together all at once is not the way to do it. So really where we're looking at is GraphQL, and saying GraphQL is I think a great pivot point around which innovation can be done. Because with GraphQL, we can have our good old-fashioned CMS4 site running there with the ORM and the form schema, feeding GraphQL, and all the CMS4 stuff that works for you reliably. And we can connect to that. We could connect totally new ways of building administrative interfaces or totally new ways of delivering websites. And we don't need to move away from CMS4 before we do that. And instead, we can kind of decouple the version upgrade from the potential for innovation. So what's likely to come next is that we keep CMS4 usable for the coming years. We look at the dependent projects like PHP, Symfony, PHP Unit and the like, and we find ways of using newer versions of those without breaking the APIs. We try and split up the framework further without breaking APIs so that we have smaller components that we could look at innovating on or experimenting with new approaches rather than doing that with the entirety of Silverstripe CMS. And we allow experimental modules and refactorings to be used one at a time on projects that are primarily CMS4 installations. So you don't need to switch to CMS5 to get the things new. You can just try the new piece of whatever area matters to your project. And we use GraphQL as that enabler where it makes sense. So if we're looking at building radically new ways of delivering, website content or building administrative interfaces, we can say, oh, well, does it make sense to build something completely new that talks to GraphQL? And we don't worry about a feature complete CMS5 contender for now. By the time CMS5 comes around, it will be after these experiments have proven themselves in the real world, and the kind of the winners we want to pull together to say, hey, look, let's really push this forward. But in the meantime, we can have not so much a monolith as a fleet, and we can have that fleet sailing forward into the future. And I think its distribution will make it stronger and basically make the innovation journey of Silverstripe a whole lot more interesting. So on that note, I'd like to say thank you. Do we have any questions?
Sam, I'm staying with you for the questions.
Cool.
So guys, now it's the chance to ask Sam all the stuff you always wanted to know about Silverstripe. Don't be shy.
So far, I've seen a comment on my shirt.
It's actually a poll.
Yeah, that's a poll. It is the Silverstripe dress code. I wore this for our company photo. We're getting our company photos redone, and this is the shirt I've got in those. So this is official Silverstripe wear.
Nice one. So I guess people are just happy that you shared all this because I just see clapping.
Yeah. Do you have the questions showing anywhere?
Well, actually, I'm looking at the stage chat.
Oh, the stage. I was looking at the backstage chat. Silly me. Let's go back. So there's been all this chatter going on, and I've ignored it through the whole talk.
But that was the idea, so everything's fine.
Yeah. Nice. So yeah, nice intro, even nicer shirt. Cool. Yeah, Lars said easy upgrades. That sounds good. I think we really place a strong value on keeping upgrades easy and not basically forcing busy work on people. And that's a challenge to then say, let's try radical new things while also keeping everything the same. And so for me, I think the idea is people are okay with investing in something if it's actually of direct benefit to them. So if they have to take if they're like, we want to do security better, and it's like, all right, well, we'll have to upgrade your security section. They're like, fine, I get that. I want something better. And so I'm getting value for that investment. But they should be able to choose which part they upgrade. I think the other side of it is that we often overestimate as developers and product creators the extent to which people want something new. We're like, it'll be new, it'll be great. And they're like, the old one was fine. And this is different. And I'm sure it's better, but I liked the old one. And, that's people's reaction a lot of the time, again, unless they've chosen the new thing and they're like, I wanted the new thing. I had pain from the old one. You've given me something that solves my problems. Now I'm really happy about the change. And again, kind of comes back to this whole idea of not having a sort of a big monolith wheel forward, making all the changes for all the people in the same way.
Yeah, I think that's always kind of the trade-up. I really love the idea that you are saying you will not force people to upgrade, because that really shows that you guys listen to the community. Because yes, it was kind of a pickle upgrading from especially ancient 3 versions to 4 version projects. So still looking forward to version 5.
It's going to be more interesting new things one at a time, and I think Silverstripe 5 would be like what comes after. Oh, we've done all these things. You've been using it for years. Now it's official. Like that. That's much more how I think it'll come. Yes, CMS means CMS, Benjamin. Sorry about the Kiwi accent. It's part of the deal with Silverstripe. You've got Kiwi founders to understand. There was another question I was going to ask. Any plans on switching to another templating engine like, say, Twig? It's not so much about switching a templating engine as do we want to allow a nice developer experience with, say, Twig? And I'd say 100% yes. So what I would hope for is that you could take your Silverstripe data model, you could plug it into Twig templates, maybe another controller stack, and basically, render a website based on those Twig templates and whatever controllers, using the data that was managed in Silverstripe CMS. So that's the kind of plan we expect, not so much forcing everyone to drop the old Silverstripe templates, but giving people the choice of using Twig. Aaron's asked, is the plan to break Silverstripe down into multiple upgradable modules, e.g. security templating forms? So that's an experiment that I'm currently championing. It's an ambitious experiment. So what we're looking at doing is trying to split it into modules without breaking any APIs, which is like keep all the classes the same. They're just in different composer packages. Framework includes them all. So you drop it in, just works. It's an experiment. We don't know if it's going to work, but that's an experiment we're currently undertaking. Luke Percy.
Sure.
Gridfield Inception. I mean, it's something that I think there are tactical fixes to that. Like you can do things like, rather than having the grid field open up a nested form, you can just have canonical URLs for a given object, and so just basically redirect to another part of the app rather than having a grid field nested inside it. These are kind of areas where in the course of building the risk management app, there were like small changes that we basically raised as pull requests. And that's tended to have been kind of what we've done. I said, rather than, trying to design it in a vacuum, come up with a solution for a specific project and then raise it as a pull request and basically use the pull request as a way of discussing how much broad applicability does this have. So yeah, that might be something that comes out of it, because I have experienced that on the risk management app as well, or it's something that your team might want to give a go too. Sam, you mentioned upgrading PHP Unit 8 to version 8. That's really exciting. Is there a timeline for that plan? No, there is no timeline, sorry. The idea is that we would, we could potentially move the Sapphire test and the other stuff that's hard-coded to PHP 5 to a separate PHP Unit support module, and so that then you could use a newer version of that module which worked with PHP Unit, a newer version of PHP Unit, or you could drop it entirely and just rely on the tests, test support classes that aren't actually tied to any particular testing framework. So it would mean that your project could run a different version of PHP Unit than like what the framework itself is tested in. Because again, not forcing everyone to upgrade their version of PHP Unit in sequence. Certainly moving versions of PHP Unit, that means you have to change your tests. So that's a breaking change. So it's not something we'd force on people, but it means that we could have people just choose just to upgrade that piece because that's what they've chosen, which is again this theme. One comment I received from WordPress users is that Silverstripe doesn't have off-the-shelf plugins. They feel like WordPress is a better choice because of that. Personally, like the idea that the developer handles modules through Composer. A user-driven plugin system, is that something Silverstripe would consider? It's like, it's a great idea for a community project. I don't think that there's any fundamental blocker to it. I think this is the idea that Silverstripe can be taken in a lot of different directions, and it is as much a toolkit as it is a specific product. I don't see us putting a lot of time into building that out, but I think as part of the ecosystem, it sounds like a really cool idea. Like, I see they said it was a trick question. Thanks, Aaron and Colin. How you do that safely is another question. And I think a lot of those systems where you'd work would be you have basically a loud list of modules that are blessed by the developer to say, yeah, any one of these modules can come in, and I know that they'll work with my code. Or the other way you can do it is where you sort of install all the modules that a user might want to use, but have some of them disabled. But yeah, there are pitfalls. It's not really something we're focused on, but it's not something I'm like opposed to. All right, I don't. Nathaniel, you sort of said add multiple host URLs for database for specific actions such as writing and reading. I would suggest raising a GitHub issue about that. I'm not exactly sure what you're getting at, but it's the kind of thing that if you want to sort of write up a GitHub issue describing your use case and sort of why you want that and how you think it might work, like that's a good way to get that discussion started. Probably it would end up in, yeah, if you want to raise a pull request, like we certainly help you review it and get it merged if it's appropriate. Yeah, that's how that stuff rolls out. Cool. How are we doing for time, Julian? I know you've got a schedule to keep to.
Well, we're still fine. We have some 10 minutes left for questions.
Oh, okay.
If you guys want.
All right.
Yep.
Yeah, it looks like there's a few more. I just didn't want to go over your time. So Damir switched from 3 to 4, gave me a lot of work. I was annoyed and thought they made it more complicated, but below the line, the benefits are worth it. I think that was a difficult thing with Silverstripe. There was a lot of tidying things up that had to be done, and the sort of short-term pain for long-term payoff was beneficial. But I think it's just we did that once. We can't just do that multiple times to people, and that frankly, I think although there are point areas where Silverstruck 4 can stand to improve, I think that in terms of a base of namespaced code working on the Composer ecosystem, and can be plugged into other things, like I don't think it's so bad. I think it's got the opportunity to basically grow from there in more of a managed way than needing to clear the decks and break a bunch more things. Michael Corona says, my designers want more templating options. Is there any thoughts around that? So I guess allowing the use of Twig would provide that. Where our people pushing the envelope on front end have gone has tended to be like, can we do single page apps and pull the content in with GraphQL? So GraphQL's performance has been an issue that Aaron Carlino, Uncle Cheese, has been working on a lot recently. There's a new version of the GraphQL API that's sort of in development at the moment. Head over to the GitHub GraphQL module if you want to sort of follow along. But the idea is that you could use GraphQL to power a single page app, or like a Jamstack app where you render offline. And so these give a lot of templating options. The other option will be using Twig. And finally, if you've got any specific improvements you want to make to the SS viewer system, feel free to raise a pull request. Any other questions? Julian, do you see any that I missed?
Well, Lars asked something about performance testing.
Okay, let's see. Sorry, Lars says, have you done any performance tests with the new class preloading feature? Oh, not yet, no. It is interesting, but yeah, it's just we haven't looked at that. Sounds cool, but